This video is just about how bad choices can ruin you. And it's going to be a quick video about bad choices, especially to the younger crowd or to anyone, for that matter, who want to listen, have a bit of a drop in the bucket, and just listen to some advice. So, bad choices is definitely something that I think can ruin your life. And I mean, we're not even talking about smoking or by electives of gambling and stuff like that. I'm just talking about bad turns in life, and also about basic things, which there's the shadow self that you have when you're younger, and in this time I think that it's very important, especially during your teens and your early teen years, like 13, 14, and these like prime times in your life where you have to really try and you have to capitalize on your ability to think and so on. I mean, your mind is the strongest. I mean, if you know neuroscience, you understand that the mind is pretty strong during those ages, still developing, and definitely when you're 17 and 18, it's by charts kind of fully developed by then. But I think at an early age, like, just after 10 years old, your first decade in this world, I think it's important to kind of have and absolutely for parents to kind of motivate their kids to have, a full comprehensible analysis by teacher, by caregiver, by psychologist to kind of probe what the kids' talents are and where they're going to be directed. And I don't think that it's important that these kids should direct their own course in life. They should be steered toward a course where the teacher or the caregiver can see their own talents. And this is the prime role. Um, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I think I did wrong in my life. Now, there should be something about the idea of determinism and choice making back when you are in those ages, that you're starting to grow up. And I do think it goes to the point of there's a lot of teaching models. I don't know a lot, but I could tell you that I knew a couple about the idea of teaching kids what they're strongest in and being able to kind of hammer a hand on the strength of a kid's ability to be something. Like some people are more verbal and others are. I can tell you, as for me, it's kind of hard. But I mean, I was always quite. I wasn't always very good verbally. Like I would say, I'm much more better verbally. I can keep my cool verbally quite. However, it's hard. Like I'd say, verbally, it's difficult because sometimes, especially when I'm angry, I can't really speak well. But generally speaking, I can form an argument. I can fence a very good rhetoric, and I can speak and form debates, and I can usually win debates. Like I have a good skill at dealing with people, kind of sympathizing or subliminizing with them, and being able to kind of mesmerize the conversation. So I do have the verbal. I do think that my personal problem has always been the mismatch of my talents. And that's something that a lot of kids can be responsible for doing. That mismatching, that inability to really see through the waters. And this is why you need guidance. Now, for me, I think because I was young and I wasn't really irresponsible, but I was in dreamland. I was in cloud nine, and I was extremely creative kid, and I don't think I really had a course. Like I would have said I wanted to become a scientist. I always say this on my channel because this was true. I wanted to become a scientist. Like I was extremely intellectually curious. I thought of myself as a genius, and especially in my younger years, like I was extremely obsessed with Einstein. And I remember I used to go to the local library and I borrowed books on science, different topics. We had a whole series. It was almost like simply similar to popular mechanics. There were a couple of books, and there were volumes. There were exodices, and there were volumes. There were omnibuy of these volumes, and I would go to the library. I would take these books out, and I would lend them for a time. And with this, I would study these books. I would try the experiments out. I was extremely fond of chemistry at an early age. It was immediately mesmerizing to think that you can have two matter, and you can blend them together, either by oxidizing them or by combining them in fusion or fission, which is basically nuclear science. But this is kind of like chemical. You can have a catalyst and a reactive, right? I'm not a chemist or anything. I had my chemistry back in year 12 and stuff, but you can have a catalyst and a reactive, and you're going to get something completely weird. for example, you can have the substance of, let's say, two solids. No, not two solids, bad example. You can have a gas in like a liquid, something that is like moving freely. You can combine them and you can get almost like a solid, almost like mercury if you think about it. Like it's almost like it's the only solid that's kind of flowing. It's almost like a liquid with the properties of flowing, but it's actually a solid. It's actually weird because, I mean, chemistry was quite magical. I mean, chemistry is the forefront of alchemy, which was the magical system of combining and basically producing lead and from gold, gold from lead and brimstone. So they have fused different matter and materia to be able to get to gold, and there was a golden path of actually getting to gold, pun intended. But so going back to the topic of learnedness and the ability to steer your own course, there's a couple mistakes that you can make in life that I do think is quite, is going to trifle you from ever succeeding. And one very big mistake that you shouldn't be making is when you're young, and you shouldn't be, and this is not something that a young kid can say against. I mean, that's partly, I think that should be part of the curriculum. That if a kid wouldn't be able to sit a day, but there's a day in school. With us, we had only one such day. I mean, this is South Africa, and I think the education system generally in South Africa, unless you're privately schooled, really is struggling. I mean, the education system in this country is, unfortunately, it's an old English standard we still are at. And it's very unfortunate, but I always say the teachers are overworked and underpaid, and that's why the education is so extremely bad. There's no funding to education, it's overly expensive. It's an elite cream of the crop market, and only aristocrats can actually get funds for study. I see now that with the education, we have a kind of subversive Nazism here, where it's only the South African education that actually counts here. Like, no, they won't accept foreign schools. They don't see, the foreign universities in this country is not a good thing. If you come from a foreign place and you're coming to resettle, it's not. People don't look at you as you have. Foreign qualifications is very skeptically aligned in the education and in the public and private sectors, especially in the public sectors. I mean, you won't get a job if you are trained internationally. So this is never good for a country to kind of blow back on their international recruits, because they have an over skepticism. But my point was, so the education system is I think it's unitary. It's very unitary, and it's almost like it's only one class of a way that worked since the 1900s. We were introduced to an old Cambridge system, and we have never really transformed. And I do think that's one of the backbone of issues with the education system. But the education system as it has it, there was a day that in my school I was about 12 years old, and there was this review day that we had to sit an aptitude test, and I didn't make it that day. And I didn't get another chance to do the aptitude test. So this was quite an important day, because this is kind of the day that you find out about your aptitude and what you're good at and not. And me being, my being very interested in science and analysis and exploration, I was pretty sure, science was the way I want to kind of do my life into. And I went that course, right? But a bad mistake later, I would have found that. But early in your life, you got to kind of find out what you want to do. And I think the education system should have some really some worry about what they're after in general, because they're only the one day. If you don't make it, then that's completely a blowover for you, and that shouldn't be the case. If someone doesn't make a day, they should have a chance. I mean, the test is only an hour long. They should have a chance to reset, or have at least a teacher, for almost like, I wouldn't say forcefully, but demandingly, at least tell this student that they have to sit a specific test. And each student should have the chance to take the aptitude test to probe their ability. Now, this isn't 100%, but it's something. And aptitude tests do aid something. I mean, even though it's not 100, it's as certain as it can get for the education system, at least. So that's my problem. I think, and I say I don't know what it would have been and what it would. I'm pretty sure what it would have. I don't really say it's gonna be. It would have been law or anything, but I think if the aptitude test what it should, and if he didn't say I'm interested or I should go into science, it would have been a shock to me. But at least I would have had a reference frame later to work on from. Because I mean, as for me, I always say I was very cognitively curious at an early age. And all of this actually points out to a specific area in the brain. Like, I would say my skills personally are, I'm also reasonably good with IT. Like, I've always had a knack for computers. I don't know why, but logic doesn't work well usually with me. Like, but with computers, I kind of just have it. I just have a knack for it, like, in a way. I can figure, I'm a great researcher, I would say. I mean, my prior boss told me that. Not the one I had, but before that, in, in Oz, he told me, I have a knack for research. I'm really good at research and stuff. So I was never really, and I do think this is also something that would have come through in the aptitude test, is I'm a slow learner. For me, I'm slow. I'm not really quick. I'm not a quick person. And that's also not a good thing, because the faster rise, it's not always the case where it says, well, the tortoises take over the hare. It's not always the case. It's most likely so that the tortoises, and I do think it's a problem with slow people like myself, is um, slowness is, I used to think of speed and learning as there's kind of a ceiling. People learn to the point where they can't anymore. So the slow people reach that point faster, and that's usually that's usually so. So that is, for me, I mean, I found it out a bit later in my life, and I mean, my brain changed. I don't know why, but between the boxing that I've done and the rugby and I've done some AFL as well, Australian Football League, and a couple of other sports, I've actually contracted brain damage. I mean, this is it's a very plausible theory that you could probably point at it and say, ha ha, you're just trying to make excuses. But I was a very different kid, and I think between all the sports, the concussions that I probably have gotten through boxing, all the hits to the head, I didn't go unconscious, but the cumulative number of hits to the head, I definitely saw a regress in my ability to understand information, especially now. I'm a lot slower than I was, to the point where I'm actually unfunctionably slow. My ADHD has gone through the roof. I see it every day. Like, I really battle. I have to make reminders to remember things. If I don't make my reminders, I will forget stuff. I will forget some keynotes. So for me, my reminders is keeping me through the day. Like, if I see someone, I told you guys I'm working in a hospital, and I'm trying to remember, the people that I see, and I'm trying to make a note of that, of what their conditions is, the treatment plans, and stuff like that. So if I don't do these things, I'll probably fail at my job. So I have to have a heavy-handed attitude to my own condition, and life is a struggle. And I mean, now what I wanted to say in regards to teaching is, if you're a young guy, you have to take it seriously. You have to use 5 seconds to not play games and just to kind of meditate on this idea of where are you going to be in 10 to 20 years from now? It's a serious question. And life is not just going to happen. You're going to have to make it happen. Otherwise, it's not going to happen to you. You're going to have to think how your life is going to. You're going to have to think about how it's going to pan out. Otherwise, it's not going to pan out if you don't plan it. I mean, I used to make that mistake. I studied the degree, and I worked very hard for where I got into, only to actually not being employable. Like, I'm an unemployable person at this point. I've been 3 years old. I couldn't find a job. I was lulled back to this country for an apparent job in programming. And I studied, I pretty much, I mean, electronics, and it goes to another thing, engineering, and I keep stressing this. Engineering is one of those career paths where you should think very carefully. Like, it's not like the olden days where, no one knows anything about engineering and stuff. Today, we have an open source market, especially when it comes to programming. Anyone can pick up the skill of programming. They can learn any language they want. So if you go into automation, you compete against people who are technical, appies, or people who are just technically trained or self-trained and so on, who can work in a bunch and who can just do one skill. Especially with most jobs today, they require a skill. They're skill based and skill driven. They're not career driven or they're not professionally driven. We're moving away from professionally driven jobs to skill driven, skill driven career paths. Like with programming, automation, all these things can be learned by skill. So professions become obsolete because everything becomes skill driven now. Where, for instance, programming and so on, even engineering becomes skill driven. Everything can be cut out into programming, drafting, things like this, skills that you can pick up. We don't need real engineers anymore to work out the circuits because we have computers doing it for us today. So engineers, we just need the programmers. So that's the problem with engineering. If you're not ready, the degree can help you. Don't get me wrong, but if you're not a skill-driven person or engineer, the degree is not going to help you. The degree is actually going to be a crutch to you. It's just going to be a vice, not a virtue. And this is kind of the thing I never saw through in my degree line. I thought, I'll study, get a degree, and I'll get employed. And it never really occurred to me that the degree can actually just be a massive crutch. And it is a crutch. I pay a lot of money per month to a student loan that I never will use. And actually to the point where it's getting worrying me. I'm starting to think of going bankrupt because, I'm trying to keep up with all these payments and it's really stressing me out. It's just like stressing me out how much things cost, and especially when you just ran into a big void of the student loan. So try and think twice. I mean, if you're not really, really intelligent or really smart, don't have the goal of just passing a degree or anything like that. Work if you don't have the intelligence or the cognitive knack of you you know you have the ability to see through things like in 4 dimensions. Then don't make people rich. Don't make the bureaucracies rich. Don't make the aristocracies rich. Don't make these people rich because the thing is, it is a business nonetheless. I mean, the universities they're Ponzi schemes. I mean, they appeal to a large market and they sell a small bit of gold to a large market, and no one sees these things. And the fact is, you clearly don't need a degree, so there's a lot of career paths that you can pick, but you need to know which one you need to pick. Otherwise, you're going to run into the wrong wall. And the way to do it is with guidance. I told you this before. Like, you need good guidance. You need to ask, and you need to use the time when you're young to plow and to seed so that those seeds can grow. Just like with farming, it's a 5 to 10 year plan. And many times, I mean, I know quite a lot of farmers, so I know the timeline where the idea of sowing and reaping comes in, and I can tell you it takes a massively long time. And the same thing happens with the life. Like, you're investing into a young farm, you're investing into your life is like a farm as well. And it's utmost important that you invest the right resources, because if you're just gonna, like, you can work, right, but work doesn't mean or navigate to results. Result driven work is intelligent work. So don't try and eradicate, don't try and synonymize the idea of work to the idea of results drivenness. So, just like a farmer who's incompetent can sow and reap the wrong stuff and get something that's not even, like, for instance, if you sow flower seeds on the wrong soil with no nitrogen, with no with no elements of growth, and there's no sun. I mean, there's no photosynthesis. Like, if you chemists probably know the synthesis of that one, then you're not going to get anything in 5 to 10 years. Like, your plant is going to go bust very soon. So you want to know that you're going to have to make a strategic plan. This is my maneuvering, this is my house, this is where I'm going to build. This is kind of how things, you're going to have an understanding of the climate, meteorology, attraction forces, soils, when you're doing the farming, just as with your own life. You're going to have the intellectual, skill set or intelligentsia to make informed decisions, and that's going to take time with also a lot of research. So that should be your prime motive. And this doesn't only go to the young crowd. This goes to everyone who's listening so much. And I mean, I don't know what to do at this point in my life. I mean, I've taken the wrong path, and I'm just kind of drifting, keeping YOLO and driving slow. So I'm just kind of, I'm just trying to approach life like the old Yeti or the gypsies or so on. Like I'm just trying to be kind of just go with the flowish and the hippie like the Taoist way. And it's actually the only card I can play at this point because I've made some really bad bumps in the road. I've conquered some really bad bumps in the road, and this caused me to not take more knocks because eventually you just get tired of taking knocks. I mean, you just get tired of that game. And I mean, it's a game that worked for a young man, but when you get older, you get kind of bump savvy. I mean, to the point where you get savvy, you get knowledgeable about it, and it's not as lofty as it was before. The idea of taking knocks down and getting beaten to the ground. Like if you're young, it's a young man's game. You can fail, but you don't want to fail when you're after 30 anymore. Like you're tired of failure, and you just want to take anything that actually works. So do note that if you fail to procure a plan, and you find out that you're not really a talented guy, I mean, you're not going to suddenly rise from the ashes when you're 31 and think, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. If you found out that you're a failure pretty much, I mean, that's pretty much it for you. You're going to have to settle for being a janitor or something. You're going to have to settle for a medium pay job or a low end pay job. You're not going to be able to do well in a, let's say, higher. You're not going to build a future for yourself, at least. It's not at least if you're living in a developing country like this country. You're not going to build a future. And that the future won't be one of happy ending. So, yeah, it is pretty important that you take kosher and you think about your future at an early age. I mean, you get a guidance counselor. I don't know why more adults don't reach out to children, or teachers even, who can guide them and be coaches for them. Because, I mean, a child of 13 can't really dictate the course of his own life. And I mean, that is exactly why the school system should be there, to make sure that the child is actually intellectually gifted. I mean, for me, the only test I did in school was right brain, left brain tests. And at that time, I was like literally in the median of right brain, left brain, and I was both. And I don't know, I've never taken an IQ test, at least in the private school I was in. The only 2 times I've taken the IQ test was when I was really, really young. And apparently I scored pretty high on this test when I was very young. And my IQ flatlined when I was about, definitely, like when I was really young, I had like an IQ of 130. And when I was like, I would say when I was like 12 or 13 years old, then my IQ was 110. So it went down by 20 points. And I was like literally just a bit above average after that point. So I think at an IQ of 105 to 110 was where I was throughout my life after that point. And so that described why I struggled. I was never the dumbest guy. I was never as dumb as a brick of hammers, like as a bag of hammers or anything. But I would say verbally I'm still pretty strong. Like, my verbal IQ is, I would say amongst engineers, I've seen quite a lot of engineers in the report writing and stuff. I've always written the reports. I've always been able to write and speak up and do well in speaking and presentation, even though I'm pretty anxious. I've always had a knack with speaking and describing. Like I've read and wrote at a very young age. At a very young age of I think 2 or 3, I've read and wrote. So I've been able to read and write. So it's something that came from a very young age with me. And I won't say I'm the strongest verbally, but I definitely had a very big upper hand to the other. In engineers, I don't think generally can write well. It's weird, but I wouldn't even say average, acceptable level of writing. And I just had the knack of writing and spelling at a very early age. So I think my verbal IQ is, when it comes to numeracy, I mean, I'm not I'm not numerically very strong, to be honest. Mathematics, I've never really, I've been extremely excited and interested in math and physics, but I've never really been good at these activities. And I mean, verbally, I would say that's actually where my IQ is probably the most and the strongest. And definitely tactilely, I would say that the touch of the the kinesthetical element of my IQ would definitely be higher as well. But these things you gotta measure when you're especially young. Say not too young, because your IQ does fluctuate a lot. So I mean, you can, and this is the thing, you can have a 4-year-old child who's pretty much a genius who can become quite average when he's like that. That's true. Just because someone's really smart, and the same thing. Just because someone's really dumb when he's 4 or 3 doesn't mean he's going to be dumb when he's 10. There's a higher oscillation effect, at least, to look at the bell curve. I mean, there's more fluctuations when you're at the ages of 3 or 4. So don't ever underestimate a kid who's, let's say, 4 and still can't read, because there's still fluctuations in the IQ range. And also the same thing with, and that's kind of the bad news, someone who's very sharp at the age of 4 or 5 or 3 or even might actually become dumber and flatline at the age of 10. So you don't actually know. You really don't know. I mean, that's been true for me. I was quite smart at an early age. I'd say my IQ was 130. So don't take IQ tests anything, I would say not before 16. Don't take any, no IQ test is really, set in stone before that age, because, IQ still fluctuates, your brain's still developing and stuff. And I definitely say 25 is kind of the cutoff to measure the game, because that's when your brain stops developing, right? Apparently through science. So, but by then you've already stopped. Yeah, so definitely 16, I would say, is a good measure. 16 to 18. 18 is a good measure as well in school to take an IQ test. And, be on the lookout for your talents and for the areas where you're actually sharper. Like, I think with all these things, you will know that you're good at something. Like mathematics, you would know that you're good at it, and you don't really need someone to kind of push you at the back to know, or give you a bump at the back to know that you're good at it. You naturally will feel that you're inclined to certain things. Like some people are better at languages. Like I'm one of those people. I'm naturally good at grasping languages, and I can speak a couple of languages. Like I'm already bilingual, given that I've spoken English and Afrikaans at a very young age, but I also speak a couple other languages. Like I can understand Polish, I can understand some Turkish, I can speak a couple languages at this point. So I'm very interested in the linguistical, umbrella and the different languages. I've studied genealogy. I've been interested in that type of field. So to me, languages comes naturally, reasonably naturally. I wouldn't say I'm the strongest, but definitely it comes naturally to me, at least to comparably naturally. And I would definitely say verbally. So some people aren't very good verbally. Some people can't even hold their shtick verbally when they have to argue or anything like that. But they naturally just have it with math. So yeah, some people look as dumb as a brick when you argue with these people, but they can do it pretty well when it comes numerically. It's actually quite reversed. I mean, most people who are really good numerically are dead as a doornail when it comes to verbal IQ. It actually, I've noticed, like I said, I've noticed it in engineering. Most engineers can write to save their lives. They can spell it, and however, these people are pretty smart when it comes to cognition. And I don't think it's just carelessness. I just think it's their IQs. Their IQs are more tainted to the point of where they're more numerically, or their frontal lobe has more grey matter than their other lobes, and therefore they have more bang for their bucks when it comes to the frontal lobe. So I think that's probably the reason. As for talent, yeah, you got to steer your life, make sure that you are on the right track, and keep on just analyzing don't overanalyze, but analyze your own situation and what you're interested in, but also do aptitude and IQ tests and to probe your personal, if your interests align with your talents, and be willing to say that you're just not aligned to something, because the worst thing that could happen is that you're going head and feet into a degree or a course that you will just end up passing in the end, but you won't have a talent for, and you will be outcompeted by other students or by other chairs who are way smarter and more advanced than you are in that field. I mean, that's what happened to me. I eventually graduated with a degree that I really don't have much talent into. And I mean, it sucks ass, because in one way, the expected norm is for, you don't really want to do a profession and then find out at the end that you're not really suited for the profession, or that you're not, that you had to work very hard to get your professional accreditations and tenures, but you're not really naturally aptitudable to that specific line of field. So you don't really want to be there. You want to be at least in the top 7, the top 25% or 20% of your field to be accepted, and to accept yourself, and to allow yourself to study something and to go into something, I think that's important to realize, not to make the mistakes that a lot of us has made. You know, the St. Andrean spoken about this, Virgin Messiah spoken about this. There's a couple of other YouTubers, John Collins, I think I can mention a couple. Nathan Harslet from Centrist Philosopher, he's also spoken about these topics a lot of times. He's also a student, studied journalism. He also warns about it. So there's a whole heap of us now saying to people in their face, you got to be careful, you got to be careful, you got to be careful. We can repeat ourselves till we're blue in the face, but the fact is, people got to listen about it. Like, don't go and study engineering, don't go and hog off to engineering or computer science, especially not programming related stuff, because those things can be taught yourself. You can in an open source environment teach yourself how to program. It's not restrictive to just the enrolled students, and that's what's so dangerous about automation, because it can be taken over by kids of 5. I'm not saying automation engineering, I mean programming here. Anyone can learn it. You don't need a special package, or you don't need money to learn. That's what's so scary about it. So you go and pay off something that... Now, engineering is something different, because if you're studying... Like, I did a lot of papers, not only in programming, but in electronics. But even yet so, it's obsolete now, because, you know, who needs analog electronics when they can hire a digital guy who can just program a couple things to them? They don't need to understand the circuit anyway. So you got to be careful what you study, make sure it won't be obsolete by technocracy. And unfortunately, so a lot of jobs do. A lot of jobs do get automated, and they do end up breaking the tie with their own people and their own practitioners. So you gotta make careful decisions, and you gotta make reasonable choices in your life. Otherwise, you gotta just go bust very soon, and you're gonna end up with student debt in the skyrocketing in the north. So you gotta be very careful what you study, what you make. So that's the only thing I want to say today for you guys. But enjoy.